Diagon Alley was just as I had imagined, or so I thought. A long street, usually full of crowds and students running around to pick up their school materials. Usually around this time of year it was calm due to the fact most students were already at school and the early morning made other people too sleepy to get up and open the shops. "Everything's closed," I pointed out. "Not everything," Professor Malfoy assured me, walking with confidence. "Malfoy!" I heard a voice. Both Professor Malfoy and I turned right around as soon as we heard that voice pierce the silence. I immediately noticed the figure on a man running right towards us. His ginger hair in a mess, and a small 3-day beard appeared on him. "Weasley, what are you doing here?" Was having a drink at the Leaky Cauldron when I overheard someone mention that Professor Malfoy was in Diagon Alley with a blonde girl, he said excitedly, though I wouldn't have guessed it was a student. The unknown man turned to me and extended his hand in a friendly way. It was, again, the first time in a long time someone actually wanted to introduce themselves to me. His smile was contagious. "Ron Weasley, though I imagine Malfoy might have already mentioned me," he said. "No, she doesn't know you, Weasley," Draco said with an annoyed tone, though his gaze softened as he thought of something. "How's Hermione doing?" he asked. "Oh, well, she's all right, thanks." He chuckled. "Anyways, I see you're with a new student." "Yes, and I'd like to go back to that, please," he muttered. The man known as Ron slightly glanced at me. "Having fun with Draco?" "Who?" "I mean Professor Malfoy." Professor Malfoy rolled his eyes, a bit annoyed that I found out about his first name. He seemed more interested in other things than catching up with an old friend, which I thought was rude. Although his way of speaking to people was rude in of itself. "Actually, keep an eye on her, Weasley. I need to go find some things." Professor Malfoy hurried off in the opposite direction, leaving us both on our own. Ron Weasley seemed to be a lot more friendly than the professors back at Hogwarts, which, in a way, seemed refreshing. "I don't think he likes me, to be honest," I admitted when Professor Malfoy was finally out of ear range. Ron laughed, his eyes sparkling. "Oh, that's just his intimidation tactic with newer students so that they know they must respect him. He'll warm up to you in no time." "I hope so," I muttered. "You know, Draco and I were in the same year back in Hogwarts," he explained. I glanced up. "Really?" Ron chuckled. "A real piece of work if you ask me. He's changed a lot since we graduated. What you see right now is the purest and kindest he's ever been." I raised my eyebrow. "Professor Malfoy? Pure? Kind?" He was unable to speak to me without raising his voice or belittling me. The fact that he was somehow worse in the past was beyond me. "I find that hard to believe," I admitted. "Oh, give him some time. He always has his guard up with new people. He'll warm up to you. Eventually," he promised. Ron looked me up and down, almost as if he were analysing me and all my facial features. I felt somewhat disturbed, but kept my posture. "You seem a bit old to be starting in Hogwarts," he pointed out. I scratched the back of my head, tilting it slightly. I was not one to confide in strangers, and having someone point out the fact I was too old to be in school made me feel a bit insecure. "Oh yes, well, it's a bit of a long story," I chuckled uncomfortably. "Well, I think I have time to hear it," he stated. Ron seemed to be nice, and I made an exception. I took a deep breath before babbling. "I was raised as a muggle. I had no idea magic existed until, well, 2 days ago, I suppose. I guess Hogwarts was going through a crisis when I turned 11, and I never received an invitation to attend. And I've just found out I have wizard family." Ron nodded along as I explained. "Wow, I've never heard of Hogwarts forgetting to send an invitation. My buddy Harry received thousands of letters when he didn't respond to his first letter. I don't know how it happened. You said you have wizard family. How come you didn't know what magic was? My father. I closed my eyes as I heard his voice mocking me, telling me how useless I was and how I was better off dead. Ron seemed to notice my reaction and didn't press me any further for information. Well, I wish you well during your studies. Is Malfoy teaching you? He asked. He's my tutor. He's in charge of teaching me everything I need to know since I can't really attend normal classes. Not really. Excited about that, to be honest. Where's Malfoy, anyways? Professor Malfoy's silhouette appeared suddenly at the end of the street, walking towards us while he held something high up in the air. It looked like a small cage with a bird inside. His piercing eyes glared at us the moment he stopped. Since you were too busy talking with Mr. Weasley, I had to go out and get you your own owl. Draco scoffed. It was no ordinary bird. It was an owl. I had always had an obsession of some sorts with this animal, alongst of foxes. The fact I had a real one right in front of me, and it was mine. I had to stop myself from jumping out of excitement. An owl. That's how we send messages around here. You'll need one if you ever want to fit in, he explained. Malfoy let the small cage door open. The amber-coloured owl hooted at me and jumped onto my shoulder, as if I were an old friend of hers. Memories of the toy owl that was given to me by my mother's sister came flooding back. Oh, how I adored that fuzzy little thing. It followed me everywhere I went. Family events, the dinner table, my bedroom, until my father thought I depended way too much on it. He probably felt annoyed with the strange connection I had with it, so he snatched it out of my hands one night as I slept on the couch and threw it into the fireplace. No! I could never forget the way it burnt to a crisp, nor the way my father tried to downplay the situation by telling me it was just a toy, that I was too old to be so emotionally attached to it. He threatened to lock me in the basement as punishment for crying over physical materials. What are you going to name her? Malfoy asked.
Azealia.
I remember crying out as I saw her stuffed body burn inside the chimney. Azealia, I announced. Well, it's time to get you your wand, Malfoy announced, his tone returning to normal. See you later, Weasley. Give Hermione her best. Okay, try this one then. I raised the wand into the air, but as I made the gesture to perform a small spell, the wand flew out my hands and almost exploded. I shrieked, covering my mouth with the palms of my hands. Malfoy rested against the bookshelf, his arms folded against his chest, observing the continuing failures to find a wand that fit me. This was the 7th time a wand rejected me, and I was starting to fear that I would never find a wand that fit. Oh, for Merlin's sake, that's the 7th time a wand has rejected you, he pointed out. I bit my tongue, but to be completely honest, I did want to lash out. There was no need to point out the obvious to me. I was the one who was dealing with most of the backlash. Okay, what about this one? It's made out of vine wood and possesses a dragon heartstring core. Try it out, Mr. Ollivander insisted, picking out a beautifully decorated wand. I again lifted the wand up into the air, ready to perform the most basic spell, one that Professor Malfoy used previously for which I knew the incantation. Lumos! And at first it worked. I held in my hand a wand that was performing a spell correctly. At least for a few seconds. The moment I began to smile in relief, the wand began to shake violently in my hand, while the small glow intensified, I let go of it when I felt how it was trying to fly away from me. I bit my lower lip. "Damn it!" I muttered. "I don't have all day, Ollivander." Professor Malfoy repeated himself. "Well, it's not my fault they're rejecting her. One of them has to accept her, sooner or later." Mr. Ollivander complained, turning right around again to take out another boxed wand. "Look, here's another one. Maple wood with a dragon core, 12 3/4 inches and rigid flexibility. Give it a go." I removed the wand from its casing, ready to feel it rejecting me. I again lifted the wand high up into the air and said out loud the incantation Professor Malfoy had taught me. "Lumos," I said firmly but softly. The wand began to glow brightly the moment I uttered that word. It vibrated ever so slightly, but firmly as well. I felt a surge of energy travel from my fingertips down to my shoulder. It was mine. "It seems you've found your wand, Alanza," Malfoy pointed out. I could feel certain amusement in his voice. I glanced over, a bit annoyed with Professor Malfoy's habit of pointing out the obvious. I gave Mr. Ollivander back the wand hesitantly while he returned it to its original box. "I have often found that those chosen by maple wands are nature travellers and explorers. They are not stay-at-home wands. Possession of a maple wand has long been a mark of status because of its reputation as the wand of high achievers," Mr. Ollivander explained, passing on the box to myself. "Use it well." Professor Malfoy had a look through my school materials bag while we were getting ready in his office. Wand, cauldron, a set of vials, a telescope, robes, set of brass scales, owl, crystal phials. "I think we're all set for your first day. We've arrived just in time." He numbered them all before turning back to me. "Are you ready to attend the Defense Against the Dark Arts class?" I wasn't listening to him. I was holding my wand up high while performing Lumos, thinking about what Mr. Ollivander had said about my wand type. The way he described the wand's owner made me doubt his experience, to be honest. Me, an explorer, a mark of reputation, a high achiever. It had to be some sort of stupid joke or mistake. Professor Malfoy snapped his fingers at me when he realised I wasn't paying attention. "Hey, are you listening?" "Oh," I squeaked, letting the spell quickly die out. "Yes, I'm sorry." "At least you're answering now. Come on. We're going to be late if you don't move your ass," he shouted. Professor Malfoy took no time or waited for the students to settle down in their seats before barging into the room. He waved his wand around to close the windows violently, which made the room shake. The room was abuzz with the murmurs of fellow students, all equally eager to see who their professor would be this year. But when they finally found their answer, silence took over. The chairs were set up in a semicircle facing a large, ancient-looking chalkboard. Candles floated above, casting a warm glow that softened the room's otherwise serious atmosphere. I stood next to Professor Malfoy awkwardly. His platinum blonde hair was slicked back, and his expression was one of controlled intensity. "Good morning, 7th years," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "Welcome to your final year of Defense Against the Dark Arts. This year, we will delve into some of the most complex and dangerous aspects of magical defense. You will be tested, challenged, and, if you rise to the occasion, prepared for whatever dark forces you might encounter in the future." While the rest of the students prepared their wands, Professor Malfoy leaned back to me. "Take note of what you see. We will go over this during our next tutoring lesson." As Professor Malfoy continued with the introduction, outlining the topics they would cover, advanced dueling techniques, counter curses, and defensive strategies against dark creatures, I couldn't help but wonder how much he had changed exactly. Ron made me believe that he was even more of an arrogant, selfish man, but I couldn't actually imagine him being worse than he already was. I took a seat as the rest surrounded him. I felt the stares and glares of the students, wondering who was the strange girl who sat down in Professor Malfoy's chair. "We will begin with a review of your defensive spells," Professor Malfoy said, flicking his wand. The chalkboard was filled with a list of spells they had learned over the past 6 years. "Pair up and practice. I will be observing and providing feedback."
Leviosa! Expelliarmus!
Shield charms, stunning spells, left and right. I took note of every single spell written on the chalkboard. Every time I heard their incantation, I popped my head up and wrote down the effect it had on them. Professor Malfoy walked around the room, occasionally pausing to correct a wand movement or offer a piece of advice with a snarky comment. "Remember, constant vigilance," he said, his gaze sweeping over the students. "The key to mastering defense against the dark arts is not just in your spell work, but in your awareness and readiness to act." I felt utterly confused at the end of class. The way they seemed so confident in their spell casting, the difficult spells they could master. Professor Malfoy seemed content with today's class. He walked past me and whispered in my ear, "We'll talk tomorrow. Write down any questions you have." I rested my body against the windowsill in Professor Malfoy's office, sighing deeply as my father's words echoed through my mind. He wanted me dead. My mother didn't care about me, and on top of that, nobody even bothered to remember my birthday. Even though I finally made it out of that torment, even though I was already in the outside world, I felt trapped. I felt unhappy with myself. "At least you're here, Azealia," I muttered, feeling my owl land his feet on my finger. Suddenly, without any warning, the window to his office opened completely, almost knocking me off the windowsill. I managed to land on my feet, gasping for air after the initial shock. It was an owl, a mottled grey one with striking orange eyes. It landed right in front of my lap, leaving behind an envelope with a small bump. In cursive letters, I could see it came from none other than Professor Malfoy. I opened Professor Malfoy's letter. Attached to this note was a necklace with a small green stone that hung right below it. I smiled for the first time in weeks reading his little note. "Happy birthday, Alanza! Welcome to Hogwarts!"